Welcome to another crisp webinar. This one is about our Heritage Barley programme. We wanted to give you a really interesting overview of the entire process, so not just talking about the resultant malts that we've produced with the Heritage Barleys, but to really give you a core understanding of how the programme came about and how long we've been working on it. And for that, we have the participation of Sarah DeVos and Chris Rideout from New Heritage Barley and from the John Innes Centre respectively. If they would like to join me on the screen, that would be great. Sarah and Chris, are you there? They are?
Yeah.
Excellent. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
We have Dr David Griggs, our Technical Director at Crisp Malt.
Hello everybody, good afternoon.
We also have Shane from the Cheshire Brewhouse, who might very well be in a beer garden. We're not entirely sure.
I am.
You are. Excellent. Happy days. Nice to see you. Carl Heron is also with us, actually. Who's our master brewer. Carl will be joining Shane later on to talk about some beers that have been produced with the Heritage Barleys. But we're going to start off with Sarah and Chris, who have a presentation about really how this all came about in the first place, this mad scheme of reviving very, very old barleys and the usefulness of that. So I'm going to hand over to them. I'm going to disappear. As ever, please do drop questions into the chat or the Q&A window, and we'll put that to the panel at the end of the discussion. And we very much hope you enjoy today's presentations. Over to Chris and Sarah. Thank you.
Okay. Colin, can I just check that you can all see that and that you can hear us okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So, hello everyone, I'm Chris Rideout, and so I'm a scientist at the John Innes Centre, and my specialist interest area is disease resistance in crops, and I'm particularly interested in barley. So I'm going to start this little presentation and give you a little bit history about how we actually started this program and why we think the future of barley is in the past. So I'm just waiting for it to advance. Come on.
It's always typical.
Ah, here we go. So we actually started working on heritage barleys back in 2001. We did a little public demonstration project which we called Breeding Better Beer, and this was a collaboration with the University of Sunderland and Brew Lab. And what we did was we just wanted to explain to the general public about plant breeding and about how we can use our collections of seeds in crop improvement. So what we did was we got some seeds out of our gene bank at the John Innes Centre, some old barleys and some new barleys, and what we did was we grew them up and we showed them to people. And we also made some beer and we gave the beer away, so that helped us to make the event quite popular. So 2001. Now, nothing much happened for quite a while after that, but we did save the seeds that we'd grown up at that event. And then one day, Keith got in touch with me and he said, I've got a student here who's interested in working with old barley varieties and trying to find new sources of disease resistance. So we thought it'd be a nice little project to work together with. So that lasted from 2007 to 2010. That's Amal and Keith, and those are some heritage barley plots at the John Innes Centre. And that was quite successful, and it led on to a second PhD project, this time based at the John Innes Centre with the University of Sunderland as a collaborator. The student's name was Rachel Goddard, and really her subject was about disease resistance agronomic traits in barley. So that took us to about 2014. And from 2015 onwards, Sarah will take over shortly and she'll explain about what happened next to try and commercialize these heritage varieties. Also, I got a partnering project from our sponsors to help us understand more about these barleys and how they perform in different environments. And we set up some trials in North America. So that's our timeline. And what we've done is we've performed trials with heritage barleys to evaluate malting quality, agronomy, and disease resistance in a number of different places. So this is our partnering award, which we got. It's for partnering with the United States and Canada, and it's funded by our research council. And here you can see the locations of several trials that were performed. So we've got them on Prince Edward Island in Canada, in Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. So I'll show you some of that in a minute, but we also did trials here in the UK. The whole thing about trials is you have to do them year after year because the environmental conditions are different and barleys perform differently in those different environments. Here's an example of a trial that we do at the John Innes Centre to investigate fusarium resistance. You can see here these little towers which are misting the crop to create a humid environment so that we can sort of enhance the disease and find out which ones perform even when there's lots of disease present. And here's an example of the heritage barley trials on Prince Edward Island in Canada. They started around 2015, and in fact, they're still going on there. Heron Mills from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada performed the trials, and he's been taking measurements over a number of years. The key thing I want to emphasize here, multiple locations allow us to evaluate performance and quality in different environments. So just to give us sort of a couple of highlights of what we found here, we did a cross between Chevalier and Tipple, a more modern variety, and we wanted to understand how these traits are inherited. And we even published a paper on this, which was published last year. You can see that Dave Griggs and Sarah are named on the paper. And so there's a genetic map in there, and we're interested in mapping disease resistance and malting quality. So it's good that we got a publication out of that. I just want to finish with a little bit about Chevalier, which is described in the paper. Basically, all of the malting traits you find in a modern variety are present in the Chevalier background, and possibly more traits of interest. We also found it has high levels of resistance to fusarium. And a key message really out of this is that what we think's happened here is that modern breeding has focused on grain yield and extract rather than malt quality or flavour. And I'm going to hand you over now to Sarah, who's going to explain a bit more about the Chevalier project.
Thanks. So after the early days of the Public Engagement Award, I went off and did different things. But then in 2013, I received...
Sorry, Sarah, can I just interrupt you? You're very, very quiet there. If you can maybe just move the microphone, that would be wonderful.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's marginally better. Thank you. Cheers.
You have to shout a bit then.
Okay, so in 2013, I applied for and got funding from the Research Council to essentially to commercialize the science that we've been doing in the past. So this is all about turning science into practice. And we had two fundamental questions. Is it possible for heritage barley cultivars to grow and malt well enough to brew good beer or distill whiskey with? And secondly, is there a market for the malt from heritage barley varieties? And we thought we'd start with Chevalier as a proof of concept. So, especially considering it had a very good history of being used for many years. Here's an old ad from 1847 of someone wanting Chevalier seed. So why Chevalier? Well, it was widely cultivated for nearly 100 years, although it was obsolete probably by about the 1920s. Lots of intriguing anecdotes about it, that it grows well without manure, it's resistant against drought, it's fullness of starch, and a superior quality. I can confirm the resistance against drought. It certainly yields the same, essentially, whether we have a dry summer or not. So we were able to undertake a malting and brewing analysis together with Chris and with Brew Lab. And there's a picture of Rachel, who was doing her PhD at the time. We, in 2013, floor malted 1/2 ton of barley. It was quite handy having the floor malts at Crisp available for this small quantity. This was sent to Brew Lab, where Keith Thomas then performed a whole series of different brewing trials, different recipes. He assessed for off flavors, the shelf life of the beer, how the yeast performed with it. All of these things ultimately led to the conclusion that yes, you could definitely brew decent beer with this malted Chevalier. So we then thought, well, we need to scale all of this up. We normally would start with seed samples from the Germplasm Resources Unit at the John Innes Centre, and typically you get about 10 seeds from them. On a good day, you might get a few more. So back in 2001, we had started with that limited number of seeds and gradually had worked up into smaller plots and then into larger plots. Here are the malting trial plots that we used for Rachel's paper on the malting quality mapping. We then were able to bulk up and form a commercial operation with NHB. There's David Jones, and he's a contract farmer who grows the seed crop for me. All of the things that we had to consider for scaling up, such as cultivar registration, maintaining the seed purity from year to year, cleaning and dressing of the seed, and bagging and storing it until it can be delivered to farms for growing the malting crop, and also consider the route to market for the malt. And the whole idea was that as a company, we'd like to be able to add value throughout the supply chain. So after doing that for a number of years, and perhaps Dave will talk later about some different varieties, we are thinking also how this practice can feed back into science. So currently, I have sponsored 2 PhD students, one of whom is working on the soil microbiome interaction with the different heritage barley varieties, which I won't go into at the moment. And I have another student who's based at the University of Liverpool, and he's currently looking at the metabolic differences between and flavour attributes of the barley. So we had 3 questions. Firstly, does the barley variety influence the flavour of the malt? Can we identify the metabolic signatures for these differences? And then thirdly, is it possible to map the differences and therefore select new varieties based on flavour attributes? So Stephen Ashcroft is the name of the student, and he's initially using Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy as an initial screening method. And he's quite clearly able to separate out all of the different Chevalier types of samples that he's made from all of the different tipple samples. These are different types of milling and extraction that he was testing out. But the varieties clearly separate out in a principal component analysis. We're going to take this screening method and widen the analysis to our 100 different heritage barley varieties to determine whether the panel groups into specific families, and then whether these are based on where we can associate these with flavor. The families that these perhaps group into will perform a GCMS in-depth metabolic analysis. And then Stephen is going to use his mapping knowledge to combine QTL and genome-wide association methods to identify alleles linked to flavour. And so this is how, as a company, we're feeding back into the science and hoping to perhaps allow a more proactive breeding and selection procedure for flavour. And that's where our talk ends, and I think Dave takes over.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sarah. I think Colin, do you want to say anything at this point?
No, you can crack on.
Okay.
Perfect segue into the crisp part of the story. Thank you very much to Sarah and to Chris.
Share my screen successfully. I hope everyone can see what I can see. So I'm just going to really build on what Chris and Sarah have been talking about, sort of the origins of the project, into how we've subsequently taken these barley varieties on and brought them through to sort of commercial reality, made malt, and talk a little bit about some of the beers and some of the customers that have been using these varieties from us. So Chevalier was our first one, which Sarah's talked a little bit about already. So it's important to understand that throughout most of our history, we've employed selected varieties or land races of barley. So man started to domesticate cereals several thousand years ago, and he's brought those grasses through to the cereals that we recognise today. So even in the early 1800s, maltsters were using locally selected land races, and they tended to select them on the basis of looking nice varieties, looking nice barleys, growing well in the field, and generally a selection over a period of time. And that's how Chevalier arose. So Chevalier was a selection made by the Dr Reverend John Chevalier of Aspel Hall in Debenham in Suffolk, not that far away from where I am in Norfolk at the moment. And there is a story in the local history of Debenham which describes how the Reverend came to about this selection. He had a labourer, Mr Andrews, who found his shoes to be particularly uncomfortable one evening and found that there was an ear of barley stuck in his shoe, which he subsequently planted, which grew into a fine specimen that the good doctor saw. And the good doctor then took the barley and grew it on, and over a period of time, by about 1825, 1826, there was sufficient of the barley to start selling it on the market. And as it says here, it was grown in many parts of the continent as well as the kingdom, and that is where the Chevalier barley originated from. So what do we know about the doctor? Well, he was a man of his time. So this is the best picture I'm afraid I can find. I think you might just be able to read Chevalier underneath the ears of grain on that particular picture. But he was born in 1774, he died in 1846, so he was alive to see the fruits of his labour and to see Chevalier come through to a significant barley within the UK. His descendants are still living at Aspel Hall, they're still Chevaliers, but they've been into the production of cider for many years rather than malt and brewing. Again, as a man of his time, he was multitasking. So he was a doctor, he was a priest, the agriculturist that we've seen, he was also a magistrate. So he was a fairly busy man, but not so busy that he couldn't have 3 wives and father 15 children. So he did keep himself busy. A very interesting book that I'd recommend to anyone interested in the history of malting, particularly through Victorian times, is this book by Henry Stokes, published in 1885, called Malt and Malting. And in that there is a chapter dedicated to barleys, and the barleys that were being grown and malted at that time. And he describes Chevalier in some detail, insofar as widely distributed, the best known variety, grown not only in the UK, but in Northern Europe, the Southern Hemisphere, the Americas, producing a heavy crop. He uses the term friable, which is interesting for those of us that are familiar with friability as a modern measurement of malt quality, and the fact that it had all the best qualities seen in a barley. So little wonder that Chevalier was taken up rapidly and used extensively. So we know that in its peak in the UK, in late Victorian times, Chevalier was the predominant barley which was being grown. Maybe up to 90% of the barley area was taken by Chevalier. So it was truly went viral in Victorian times. What we do know, though, is that the early years of the 20th century, Chevalier its lack of certain agricultural characteristics were being exposed, and it was being replaced by higher yielding hybrid varieties, such as Plumage Archer, and we'll talk a little bit more about Plumage Archer a little bit further on. But Chevalier continued to be grown, continued to be brewed with, and even up to the time of the First World War, Chevalier beers were winning competitions, and we think it probably continued in the UK into the 1920s. And there are some records of the last sizable crops being grown in Australia as late as the 1950s. So Sarah's early work of bringing that handful of seeds through multiplication got us to a point in 2013 where we could grow a sizable amount of barley in the field. So 2013, half a hectare plot was sown at Morley Farms, and this was probably the first time in the more than 100 years that a large plot of Chevalier had been grown. So there was a real learning exercise to undergo to understand how best to grow it. And obviously we've got tools available to us today that our forebears more than 100 years ago didn't have. So we were able to produce a good crop. It stands tall. It has a tendency to fall over. You can see the harvest picture, it's a little bit flattened, but modern harvesting techniques can deal with those kind of issues. So half a hectare plot was sown, yielding about 3 tonnes a hectare. So that's around about 45% of the yield of a modern spring barley variety. So a significant deficit in terms of yield. We harvested 1.5 tonnes. Sarah took 1 tonne away to become seed for 2014, and we have 500 kilos to go forward for malting. So this was going to be the first significant size malting of Chevalier for many years. Total nitrogen was quite high at 1.8, and we tend to find that Chevalier is quite a nitrogen scavenger. It does tend to produce high nitrogen crops. So fortunately, we still have our floor maltings here at Great River, so we could do a double heritage. We could malt a heritage variety in the heritage maltings. We were able to do a small 500 kilo floor batch, kilned it with another batch, carefully balled it off the portion of Chevalier, and we were quite excited and expectant to see the analysis of Chevalier. And this is what we found. And what we found was a malt which looked very similar to a malt that we could make out of a modern variety. This was the first attempt at malting, so we went a little bit hard on protein degradation, so we've got a high soluble nitrogen ratio, but a good level of extract, excellent friability, a low level of beta-glucan, and good enzyme activities. So really the only area where it was slightly deficient in comparison to a modern variety would be the level of extract. So I think, as Sarah said, we sent malt up to Keith Thomas up at Brew Lab. Keith did some yeast trials to see how Chevalier would respond to various types of yeast. That's an IPA flavour profile that he produced, and then the rest of the malt went to the Cheshire Brewhouse. And we're going to hear a lot more later on in the presentation about the Govinda beer and what Shane at Cheshire has been doing with these heritage varieties. So for 2014, we were able to grow a more extensive area. So 5 hectares were grown, and you can see the various pictures of the crop in the field, harvested under good conditions, giving us 15 tonnes. Again, Sarah pinched quite a lot of that to become the seed crop for 2015. We were able to malt 4 tonnes in our pilot malting plant at a lower TN. Interesting, this is really the only time we've seen this level of TN in Chevalier. And all of the malt that we made from that 2014 crop was delivered to our US distributor. And they sent it off to, it went to Goose Island, it went to Sierra Nevada, Tributary, and Flying Goose. And they brewed a variety of different beers with it. There's a nice article in the Brewers Association Journal from November, December 2015, describing the beers that were brewed by those particular companies. The guy at Flying Goose, who you can see down here, he described it as the most aromatic malt that he'd ever brewed with. And Goose Island have retained their interest in Chevalier, and at the end of 2019, they released Obadiah Poundage, which is a barrel-aged porter, where the base malt was Chevalier, and very nice it is too. So once we got through to 2015, we had a couple of harvests under our belt. We knew a little bit more about the best ways in which to grow Chevalier, and we were into commercial crop production. So this was providing it out to commercial growers to grow it for us. A separate seed lot being grown, and then we were able to malt larger quantities in some of the bigger plants that we have here at Great Rydberg. We've got a major Scottish distiller who has been using Chevalier, and whiskies will be coming out in due course. We're producing some 200 to 300 tonnes a year of barley now, with malt going all over the world. And this is now the typical analysis. We've got a bit more experience of malting Chevalier, so we're able to moderate the protein modification now, but we're still seeing good levels of viability, good enzymes, and generally a malt equivalent to a modern malt, perhaps just with the exception that the extract is much lower. So it does show that over time, the emphasis of breeding new malting varieties is really focused on extract development, because all of the other quality attributes were pre-existing in some of these older varieties. In terms of flavour, this is using a modified version of the ASBC hot steep method. And what we find with Chevalier is it's very malty, really quite sweet, quite a thick mouthfeel to it as well, so it really does suit porters, suits IPAs. It would have been the predominant barley being used at the peak of IPA production within the UK, so it does suit those types of beers, but equally finds a home in more modern types, in more modern beer styles as well. And here's some examples of some of the beers which Chevalier has found its way into. UK, we'll talk about Govinda, we'll talk about Gibraltar Porter later. T.Y. Harbour is a Japanese brewer in the middle of Tokyo, uses it in his IPA. Some guys in the States, we've got a distiller in the States using it, and Green King have used Chevalier within their heritage fine ale range as well. So we're seeing a lot of interest in a lot of different parts of the world. So talking about Govinda a little bit, so 2018, the RMI organisation organised a heritage barley seminar prior to Brow, and they introduced a brewing award for beers brewed with heritage varieties. They got a lot of worldwide entries, and they whittled that down to a finalist of 10, which were then tasted by a renowned international jury of judges. And lo and behold, the winner was Govinda. So from the Cheshire Brewhouse, this is Shane's beer, and we'll leave Shane to talk a little bit more about that in due course. And moving on to 2020, sun shining here today, about 32 degrees. We're accelerating towards harvest. This was photographed from last week, courtesy of our colleague Bob King. The Chevalier looks great. So we're really looking forward to the crop that we're going to take off of the field sometime in August and see what the quality looks like this year. So that's Chevalier. From Chevalier, we then moved towards Plumage Archer and looking at re-commercialising Plumage Archer. Now this is some extracts from a paper published in the early 1950s, which talks a little bit about Chevalier and the fact that it did have some agricultural defects, and that in the early 1900s we were starting to see the introduction of hybrid varieties. The Mendelian laws of inheritance had been rediscovered, and hybridization and genetic segregation was being used for agricultural improvement, and people were starting to deliberately breed barley varieties. So Dr. Bevan is responsible for the Plumage Archer, and you can see here, even in the 1950s, it was saying that up to 75% of the acreage in England was shared between Sprat Archer and Plumage Archer. So that's Dr. Bevan. So Plumage Archer was the first genetically true type of malting barley bred in England in 1905. So Bevan was based at Warminster, where ultimately became the Guinness Plant Breeding Centre, and he crossed the Scandinavian variety Plumage with Archer to give us Plumage Archer, and it was the predominant variety for at least the next 40 years. Its life cycle extended into the 1960s. What is also quite significant about Plumage Archer is that it's a grandparent of Maris Otter. So there's a direct genetic linkage back to Plumage Archer from Maris Otter. So Otter's parents, Proctor and Pioneer. Proctor was a successful two-row spring malting barley. Its parents in turn were Kenya and Plumage Archer. So a nice line of succession. Sarah spoke about the tasks involved in bringing these varieties back to life again, and one of these is multiplication. So it's not a task to be undertaken lightly, bringing these varieties back. We took the barleys, or the barleys were sent to New Zealand. So this is the winter, the UK winter, the New Zealand spring and summer of 2016. So November, December, January, and by doing this is a technique used by modern plant breeders to take varieties in the southern hemisphere and get 2 crops in 1 year. So we were able to accelerate the pace of multiplication. Plumage Archer had continued to be grown through from the 1960s. Small quantities have been available over a number of years, but what we had seen was that it was becoming increasingly less pure. There was also a suggestion it was desegregating back to its parents. So by taking material from the seed bank, restarting Plumage Archer, we now know that we're working with a pure version of Plumage Archer, and you can see from the trial plots here, very even, very stable appearance of the plants. So by 2019, we had enough seed to grow ourselves a commercial crop. On this occasion, we were looking to target distilling quality. We're going to be harvesting 200 to 300 tonnes of this variety as well. And this is the analysis of that in terms of distilling. This is the 2019 crop. So again, we're seeing levels of modification that we would expect to see in a modern spring barley variety. The only shortfall again is extract, and to achieve 396 litres of absolute alcohol per tonne in a barley variety which is more than 100 years old is some achievement. So we've got a lot of interest in Plumage Archer being used for distilling, and we've tasted some new make spirits and it does taste different, and our hot steep flavour profile shows it's a very sweet tasting wort, and also malty. It's not a coating taste, and if I was to put the Maris Otter flavour wheel adjacent to the Plumage Archer one, you would see that this region here is remarkably similar between the two varieties. If anything, the Plumage Archer taste wheel is a little bit supercharged in this area. So maybe, given the parentage of Maris Otter, there is a case for believing that we can breed flavour and that we can see flavour passed genetically to offspring. Some beers with Plumage Archer. This is a Waitrose product, English supermarket beer. Duchy of the Prince of Wales, the Duchy of Cornwall. Plumage Archer comes off of that land there. It's in the Old Ruby Ale, very nice. Shane has done a Govinda version of Plumage Archer. And then one of the other craft brewers in the UK, Stroud Brewery, did a whiskey barrel-aged Plumage Archer back in 2013. Again, looking at the crop, Again, really nice, even crop, shows the benefits of going back to the seed bank and starting again, putting it out. And this is a really interesting photograph. So this is Bob's hand holding an ear of Plumage Archer and an ear of Laureate. And we can see here clearly what's happened in 100 years of deliberate plant breeding to improve the yields of spring barley. So Laureate is now the predominant spring malting barley in the UK. We see a longer ear in Laureate. We see fuller grains. The real difference that we see in the contributor to the yield improvement is that the modern varieties tiller far more. So there's a far greater density of ears per square metre, because the old varieties give us decent grain size. It's just the fact that there isn't as many ears to be harvested, which is where the yield deficit arises from. So that's Plumage Archer. Then we've moved on to Hanna. So this is a continental variety or landrace, originally selected in the Hanna Valley in Moravia, which is part of the Czech Republic. And its claim to fame is that Hanna was involved in the production of the very first golden blonde Pilsner lager back in 1842 in Pilsen. So quite a landmark event, and Hanna played its part in producing that golden lager. It's also very important as an ancestral landrace for modern spring malting barley varieties. So the genes of Hanna can be traced through to the varieties Diamond and Triumph, and many of the modern spring malting varieties can trace their pedigree back to Diamond and Triumph. So again, we're seeing the progression of genes from a landrace in 1842 through to modern varieties that we're malting in 2020. So again, we've done multiplication in New Zealand in 2016-2017 in order to bring enough seed through to get us to a point of commercial production. So 2018 crop Hanna, we didn't have any crop in 19. We committed all of the remainder of the 18 crop to seed, so that for 2020 we can produce a large crop. We targeted that at Pilsner. What else, given its origins? And we're going to be in the region of 200 to 300 tonnes from harvest 2020. And this is the analysis that we got from that Hanna. So this was malted using the same process that we would malt if we were making Pilsner from a modern spring barley. Now, what is significant here is the 1.9 visual colour. So we're seeing a very, very pale wort coming from Hanna. Reasonable level of extract, again, given its age. Acceptable protein modification, acceptable friability. But it's the colour which really stands out, and maybe this is why it was selected for that first brews of golden Pilsner back in the 1840s. In terms of flavour, we've got a little bit different flavour wheel from Hanna. We've got a little bit more breadiness, which you might expect to come through in a Pilsner. Still quite sweet, and the beers which have been brewed with it have really shown some of those flavour characteristics. So we had very limited quantities of Hanna from 18 crops. So some went to Hilden Brewery in Northern Ireland for their Czech Please Bohemian Pilsner, and the rest went to Red Willow in the north of England for their Spelt Lager. And I think you could see from the clarity and the colour of the Spelt Lager just how good Hanna is going to be for producing those genuine Pilsners in 2020. So the cycle never stops, and this is 2020 Hanna. Big ears, looking forward to a good crop. It's earlier to go into ear than the other two varieties in the Chevalier and the Plumage, so we'll be harvesting the Hanna first. Quite a dense crop as well, so we're expecting a good yield from Hanna. So the cycle never stops. So we've got seed crop for 2021, growing at Morley Farms under the watchful eye of farm manager David Jones. That's David stood in the Chevalier seed crop. You can see it's quite a tall variety. David's not that tall, but it's certainly it's coming further up his leg than he would expect a modern variety to be. So that's the Chevalier seed crop. That's the Plumage Archer, and then this is the Hanna. So looking forward to harvesting the commercial crops. Looking forward to seeing what the seed crops look like, and looking forward to making some great heritage malt out of these 3 barleys, and being able to share some beers with people, hopefully, in the near future. So that's my piece done. I think we're going to go over to Shane, who's going to tell you a little bit about his experiences with brewing with these heritage varieties. I think we might even crack open a beer as well, those of us that have got access to one. So I'll put you back to Colin.
Thank you, Dave. If Shane and Carl are there in the ether, I wonder if they could join us. If you could unshare your screen there, Dave.
Hello.
Great stuff. Shane. It's currently a blank square. There he is. Excellent.
Hello.
So as Dave explained, you received one of in fact, the first year of Chevalier, malted Chevalier up to the brewery in Cheshire. And I believe, Carl, you were also involved in the brewing of it. Can you guys talk us through how that was, what the experience was like, and some of and what ultimately you produced out of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no problem. I've been brewing Govinda, English IPA, for a number of years. Hopefully you can't hear our chief designer-magist in the background there. So we brewed it with Maris Otter and a number of different barleys, and we got the Chevalier because I went to a seminar that Chris had at the Tetley building in Leeds, and I sat there, and he went through how you'd got some Chevalier barley and the story of it, and pretty much what we've gone through today, and that you were looking for a brewer to make an English IPA or a porter or something with it, and I immediately went, I'm your guy. Just happened to have some barrels in the back of my van that we're just about to brew Govinda again, and I want that barley because I want to put it in some barrels. I want to age it, and I want to see what happens. And you know, we're making a historical beer, so if we can get the ingredients that it was made with, then bingo. You know, I'm a happy guy. So I had a word with the guys there, and then I was on the phone. Ewan, we agreed that a trial brew with Chevalier barley, and from there I sat on it for a few months and did a little bit of research because wasn't sure how to treat it, whether didn't really want to treat it like a modern barley, so I did a little bit of research and sat back and found out what we should do, and Carl came for the brew day.
Indeed, yeah. I'm not long started. It was
great. Still there, Carl? You seem to have frozen.
Indeed. No, I will listen to you. Yeah, we're great. It was good to get involved. And I think your attention to detail around the actual process, because of the research you'd done, were brilliant, because it were like going back in time. It was really good.
Well, exactly. If you're going to do something, do it properly. There's no point being, you know, there's no point doing half a job of anything, specifically when it comes to beer. When I make beer, I want to make the best possible beer I can, and I don't want to be cutting corners, and I don't want to be doing the wrong thing. So we did as much research as we could, and obviously single infusion mashing is perfect for that you know, for that style of beer. And I think if you treat it like a modern barley, it doesn't give you its beauty doesn't shine, shall we say. I find Chevalier, it's got a fantastic colour. It really is nice, and you pour the beer, or pour actually, and we'll have a look. When you pour it, it's a little bit warm out here, so we're just had a bit of a boil over, shall we say, in the can. But
Your festival ever.
well, if you see, it's quite dark, but it's this is Govinda is a single malt, single hop beer, and if you were to look at that and in the same tray as a modern beer, most people would think there was crystal in that glass, as well as Chevalier, but there isn't. It's just Chevalier. So the first thing you notice is it's got a much higher colour than a modern variety, and you notice when you're mashing it, it's got so much more aroma. It's phenomenal. It fills the brew house. And
I remember that. It was amazing.
And you know, well, we were like Bisto kids, weren't we? We had a heads over the mash tun, having a ooh, you know, get that. Yeah. And great thing to brew with. And the other thing is, when we worked out how many hops were going in it for bittering, I think both of us looked at each other and went, you know, what's happening here?
Have we got this right? Yeah, like...
yeah. I mean, it was the first batch was 5 barrels, so 800 litres. We used, I think it was about 7 kilos of bittering. So you consider beers we use now with 100 grams of one dose on a 10 barrel. Kilos of bittering hop was considerable, but I think that you know, the Chevalier barley needs a much higher level of bitterness to be able to shine. It's if not, I think it beats you up a little bit and gives you something that's too sweet, too cloying. And I sat back and thought about you hear the stories of IPAs being shipped to India with a massive hop load to preserve them as antibacterial on the journey around to India. And I don't think that's true, because I think that the massive hop charge was to balance the beer out. So when it got there, it was nice and drinkable and not really sweet and, you know, really sweet and cloying, because if you don't get that bitterness right, it's you do end up with a really... I've tasted some beers that have been made with it, and I think they've been treated like a modern beer, and they've just not had that balance. They've been far too sweet, and far too much like a barley wine at 6.5, 6.6%. And it's one of those. I think. I mean, you know, obviously, we brew Gibraltar Porter with it, and that's a very high bitterness level as well. But when you taste it, it's not bitter at all. It's so complex, malty, balanced. It's a fantastic beer, and you know, I remember when I sent Govinda off to the guys at the Beer O'Clock show, and they the first taste of it in their review, and Martin there said that he said, Jesus, he said, if the Victorians were brewing beer like this, what went wrong? And you know, it's I agree with him. You know, it's I think Chevalier is a fantastic, and I absolutely love going back in history and to try and delve and find out what you know, beers tasted like back then. I mean, we're looking at another heritage recipe for July, where we're going to do like an ESB, and we're thinking Chevalier. I'm actually wondering whether it'd be more authentic to use plumage, but let's experiment if we can get some. I'll talk about that one. But I think Chevalier you can use Chevalier in a modern beer, because we're using Chevalier in DBA. And DBA is our 4.6% Burton style bitter, so pedigree Bass, that type of window. And what we decided to do was to cut the best ale with a percentage of Chevalier to add some body complexity and a little bit of you know, point of difference to the beer. And it's done a fantastic job. We've not really up the bitterness, but it's just give that beer a much smoother profile and much more complexity and a lovely aroma and flavour. And the thing with it is, people have tried that beer out of a can and they've gone, this is the closest thing we've had to cask out of any small pack. and it's just really added just some really good things to that beer. Really happy with it. And we've also brewed with Plumage, as I said before. We've done up to now. We've done Govinda with Best Ale. We've done it with Marisotta. We've done it with Chevalier. We've done it with the Plumage Archer. The Plumage Archer beer was very different. It was it was much more like a modern beer. It reacted in the brew house more like a modern barley. It was far lighter, much drier finish, crisper. The closest I would say for Plumage Archer is it's a great alternative to what's going out of my head now. The one Golden Promise, that's it. Sorry, and I would just it's a very similar sort of, for me, taste, flavour, aroma profile as that barley. Great. Also, I think people should try that and see how they go. And then we have also had a play just this last month with. We had some long ear Nottingham off you, which I know didn't malt very well, and we got it, and I really scratched my head a little bit with it because I looked at the.
We're losing Shane a wee bit there. Signal's sort of going in and out a wee bit, Shane. You become a bit garbled, I'm afraid. So, he's still chatting away. I think at this stage, sorry, Shane, I think given the time that we've got, if we could just move on to a couple of questions that people have put to us from all the presentations. Thank you very much. But quite a few questions about flavour, and maybe Sarah can speak to this. How far along is the flavour testing? So are you running GCMS? Is it flavour panels? And is it based on Congress worts or specific worts, or is it just the raw malt itself in terms of flavour assessment?
So the flavour testing is in early stages. At the moment, we're separating out the different varieties just based on their FDIR profiles, and then we're going to move on to seeing if that links with specific flavour profiles of the what would be of like the Congress wort. Okay.
So that's like work in progress then, but certainly anecdotally and just picking some other stuff.
Dave was showing us about the flavours that he was looking at. Gives us confidence that actually we'll be able to pick up these metabolites.
Yeah. Certainly seeing it in the hot steep analysis, which essentially, essentially a Congress wort. Slightly modified, a quick version of it, but we do see those differences because I do think that breeding heritage for heritage's sake is only a limited path, but when we can really see genuine flavour difference, then that's wonderful for brewers and distillers alike. Besides flavour profile, what attributes in heritage varieties do you look out for the most? Are there certain agronomic challenges, and how do you factor those in terms of which varieties to engage with?
So I would say
I've got some ideas here. Okay.
You don't want it lying completely flat.
So lodging's a big one. Okay.
So lodging is a big one. But the thing about Hanna is it's a good question.
Well, I think that for us, I mean, the interest in heritage varieties really is that they do have the potential to be sources of disease resistance, especially fusarium. I think many places
didn't quite catch that, Sarah. Was that the fusarium resistance?
Yeah, it's the fusarium resistance, really. As a source of resistance, that's something that I think heritage varieties have something to offer.
I thought the drought resistance was really very interesting.
That is a key thing, and it's something that's a bit unexpected. What we think is happening, okay, is that if you've got a block barley variety and you've got perfect conditions, you can get exceptional yields, okay. But if conditions are not optimal, you can actually fall down. And in fact, in some years, some of our heritage varieties have performed equally well in terms of yield to modern varieties. So it's like they don't yield super high, but they yield consistently from year to year.
Consistency,
okay?
yeah.
Consistency. And I think, you know, modern varieties will yield extremely high, but they also require high levels of inputs. And if you're trying to reduce your inputs, that can have quite a detrimental effect on something that's been bred like a Formula One. Okay. So it's interesting. And also the trials in Canada, we're getting quite low yields, but also modern varieties getting low yields as well.
Excellent. So really, you know, given the increase in climate change and some of the challenges in the future for farming, this is
when you ask a scientist, when will you see practical outcome of their research, they always say 20 years.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, longer term, it'd be nice if we could understand a bit more about how we can get more sustainability in different environments.
Brilliant. Very good. Well, with just a few more minutes left, I'd just quickly like to put a question to Dave and to Carl. What excites you two personally about the future of this programme?
Well, I think.
Go on, Dave.
Well, for me, it's linking us back to our ancestors, almost our malting ancestors. I mean, this is 150 years of crisp in 2020, you know, and we can go back and we can work with the material that they were working with in 1870, and just understand, you know, what it was like then. We've got, you know, we're fortunate to still have the floor maltings, so we can, you know, almost recreate the conditions. But equally, it's important to, you know, put those varieties through the modern plant, see how they react. I mean, we've got tools for analysis, which they wouldn't have had, you know, in 1870. They were, you know, they weren't really doing a great deal of malt analysis, but we can get a greater understanding of it. And I noticed there was a question about starch, and you know, whether the starch properties are different. And I think that's a real interesting area that we should have a look at, and whether that's contributing to some flavour differences. The sweety maltiness might be coming through from that. So yeah, that's the excitement for me. Carl?
Yeah, I mean, just on the back of that, for me, it's the flavour. You know, like as a brewer myself, you know, like and doing that first brew with Shane, and the aroma in that brew house was incredible. And you taste them all, you taste the wort, you taste the beers, and it's just got wonderful complexity and different notes in there. So the work that Sarah's doing will be interesting to see how that comes back. And Shane said the same. It just adds layers. And as a brewer, that when I was working in development, you know, that was my remit. It was about giving layers and more taste sensations, and that for me is great. And it's easy to brew with. You know, it's not difficult to use. You can use the normal way of brewing, so a 60-minute mash and a regular boil is absolutely fine. You'll still get the flavours there. Good point that Shane makes. You do need to balance it up. I think that's important. But loads of possibilities, and it's good. And the Hanna was interesting. That was really, really nice. And the colour of that is incredible. It's so pale. And that's something we get asked a lot about as craft brewing sales managers. Everyone's wanted to go super pale. So that might be an option for that going forward.
Good stuff. And Shane, where can people get a can of that tasty Govinda if they want?
We're selling all online at the moment. www.cheshirebrewhouse.co.uk. We can send you a lovely parcel of beer anywhere in the UK, no problem. Yeah, you know, get on there. But as for the malt flavour, for me, like Carl said, I had a quick conversation when I did the crop tour. We went in a research farm and looked at modern varieties, and I was talking to Alexander Struve of Ackerman. He said, as a craft brewer, what do you want from malt? And I said, none of these varieties in your field. Give me the old ones. I want flavour, I want aroma, and I want something completely different to the bland, high alcohol, high yield. I want something that is full of flavour, full of aroma, and Chevalier for me is the boy.
Excellent.
I'm particularly excited about the Plumage Archer from a distilling side. As the Scot in the room, I think there's fantastic opportunities there for novel new make flavour and for differentiation for all these new the new wave of craft distilleries that have been starting up in Scotland and in England indeed. So that's everyone's excited in their own right, in their own different way about the future of the past. So with
it makes great beer too.
Well, that's
great
Absolutely. Quite right, Shane.
Yeah, which I feel very put out, but that's fine. I didn't put it until later. So there we go. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to Sarah and Chris, Dave, Carl, and Shane. Thanks for everyone for joining us. And remember, catch this if you missed bits of it on the website.
Cheers. And
guys, okay, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
I'll plug this. The only beer along here, Nottingham, same place. Try that. It's lovely.
Excellent. Yeah, that is a rare beer.
and very nice. Perfect in this weather. Out the fridge, cold and orangey. Get it down here.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Cheers, Shane.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers,
Thanks, everyone. Bye.